Good morning, church. As you can tell, this is not exactly how I had planned to be meeting with you this morning, but nonetheless, it is good to be with you even virtually as we go through the Word. As might have been shared already, late last week we did notice some possible symptoms for COVID in some of the kiddos. And so we went and got tested, expecting test results back, but unfortunately they did not come back in time to verify one way or the other. Right now everybody's doing well, but out of an abundance of caution, we decided that we would stay isolated for this weekend until those test results come back, just to make sure we're keeping everybody safe. And with that in mind, I know we were planning on starting our new series on Mark today, but with me not being available to be with everyone, have the chance to walk through that together, I decided it might be good to go a different route this morning. And so I've decided to go ahead and bring somewhat of a little devotional to you all in the book of the Psalms, looking at Psalm 11 and a psalm of trust. I thought that would be very timely for today, given circumstances, even circumstances that we're dealing with as a family right now, as we are remote, virtual, and isolated. Trust. Trust is often an issue of perception with us. We don't always see things rightly, and we have to ask ourselves that question. Do we see things as they are? Now, you might have noticed, me and Chantel, we're definitely glasses wearers. In fact, we're pretty blind without them. About 2 weeks ago or so, Chantel had her glasses out, and little Zoe got her hands on them. And sure enough, within a few seconds, she snapped off one of those arms. Now, I did my best as a handyman to fix them. I taped them up, only used about half a roll of duct tape. Until Chantel told me to cut most of it off. We got them pieced together, and she was able to wear them again. But they weren't quite right. Her perception was still off quite a bit, as they tended to be a little skewed and not allow her to see the world as it really was. She could function, she could survive, but everything was off. Until about a week ago, when we finally brought those glasses in and we were able to get new ones so that she can see things right and correctly. Well, we can often function like that, with perception that is off. Perception that's just not quite there. When we let things mess with the way we perceive God. The world's always trying to mess with our perception. It's always trying to get us to look through the lens of fear rather than the lens of faith. Always trying to get us to see things just not the way they really are. As people who claim to follow the Almighty God, we're called to see through the eyes of trust. We're called to trust God. So the question is, every day for us, will we heed that call? Will we trust God? Or will we let the world control what we perceive? That's what we see as we go to this psalm today, Psalm 11. It is a psalm of trust. And right now, we're in a world where we need trust. Things are crazy right now, it's true. The world's in an interesting place. But you know what? God is still God. And He is still the one in control. And that's what we see in this psalm. As we come to it, we get to see what David is up against. The world, in this case, is his friends giving advice. But the world seeks to make us hear the wrong things. To hear the wrong advice. To get us to give into fear instead of trusting God. So let's read this psalm together. Again, this is Psalm 11. You can look it up right now if you want. I'm going to go ahead and read it for us, but please join me in that. Again, Psalm 11, and I'm reading this out of the ESV. This is what David says. To the choir master of David. In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to my soul, flee like a bird to your mountain? For behold, the wicked bend the bow. They have fitted their arrow to the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see. His eyelids test the sons of men. The Lord tests the righteous, but his soul hates the wicked and the one who loves violence. Let him rain coals on the wicked. Fire and sulfur and a scorching wind shall be the portion of their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. The upright shall behold his face. How encouraging is that? To have that psalm, to hear that, to know that we can live in that type of trust. When this psalm, we can break it down into about four clear parts. I said it'd be a short devotional, but I still got to give some note points here. And so there are four points that we can see in this one. We start off with this. Where do we start? Where do we start with things? For David, it is a declaration of trust. A second, we see, you know what? There's bad advice out there. There are people out there who will give bad advice. The world will seek to twist our perception. For David, it's some friends who stand up and think they're trying to help. Well, third, we see a correct response. And that response for David is to have a correct perception based on God. And fourth and last, well, where do we end? David closes this on a declaration of trust, because we end in trust. So those will be the elements we're looking at as we run through this. When the world seeks to throw off your perception, what do? We begin in trust. We know that opposition will come, and we're ready for it. We keep our eyes on God, and we end in trust. That's what we see. So let's go ahead and jump in there and look at that, because we start with this. We begin in trust. It's the very first line of the psalm here. In the Lord I take refuge. What a bold proclamation there. He says that before any advice comes. He says that at the outset. In the Lord I take refuge. That comes from the heart of David there. That's something that we can hear, how he draws near to God. See that word there, refuge. It indicates not just resting or waiting, letting things happen. This is a word of action, meaning to flee to a place of refuge. See, David, he is not denying that there's danger. He knows that there is danger, but he denies what it looks like. He denies what the world is trying to put forth because he knows where he needs to go. So David knew this by experience. He didn't compose this song sitting under a palm tree playing his harp. Now, he composed this psalm in the midst of battle, in the midst of strife, in the midst of hardship. We got to remember this comes out of his life of running after God, fighting bears and lions, facing down Goliaths, dealing with kings who are set against him. So he knew what it meant to trust in God in some of the craziest areas of life. David was actually likely writing this psalm around the time that he was facing attack by his very own king, King Saul. His own government was set against him, a government that he had stood for, that he had fought for, that he had lived for, and it was against him in this time. Remember, he was a great warrior. So much so, though, that King Saul was jealous. And so, as the songs went out, Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. Well, Saul's anger grew to the point where he sought to kill David. David had served well, but he was threatened. And so he was on the run. It's true, he ran, but he didn't run without trust. We see time and time again in the life of David, he chose trusting God over giving into fear. Even at the point where he has Saul in his hands, He could kill him. He could have his freedom and his victory. Instead, he trusts the Lord. He trusts that God will give him victory in time without him making a bad choice, without him doing something that he knows is wrong. And so he trusts God. And he continues to walk in that trust, even as he needs to seek God for the refuge that is needed. And it's during this time of adversity, that I'm guessing David gets his advice. Probably some friends, some close advisors, and they start speaking to him. They start speaking to him saying, hey, there's issues. Well, a key element in a psalm of trust, like we see here with this Psalm 11, is that there are issues. That's not a lie. There are problems. There's a challenge. There's danger, like his friends are going to advise. And you know what? Those things can seem very much overwhelming, beyond your control, if your perception is off. If you're not seeing through the eyes of trusting. If you're not seeing through the eyes of trusting in the Lord. See, there is something that is a challenge for David here. It's not fake. The advice isn't coming out of nowhere. But you know what? The same is true in our lives. We have challenges. We have hardships. I'll tell you, the first time that I tried preaching through this psalm, well, I thought I could imagine most of the challenges that I would face. But now, after pandemics and riots and government shutdowns, restrictions I'd never thought I'd see, even this moment of having to teach this by video, well, now I know there are a lot more unique and difficult challenges than I thought were possible. I'm sure that you probably find yourself in the same position, even just looking back a year. You know, things are difficult. The reality is, there are dangers, there are challenges in our lives. And you know what? It was the same for David. The only question is this, and it doesn't change. Will you approach it from a position of trust? Will you approach the challenge in your life right now from a position of trust? Are you going to look at those problems and say, you know what, those are too big? God can't handle this one. It's too much. Will you look at what you're facing and say, God, I trust you? You know, David could have started off differently. He could have started off from a position of fear, not trust. But you know, his story would be very different then. I'm glad he chose trust. Like David, we need to trust God. We need to take refuge in God when things come. But like David too, we need to know, number two, that opposition will come. We need to know that that will come. We need to know that there will be people, even people who are close to us, who will try and mislead you through fear. So what was the great trial of trust for David? What were his friends telling him? We see that picking up again in verse 1, where it says, flee as a bird to your mountain. For behold, the wicked bend the bow. They make ready their arrow upon the string, to shoot in darkness at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? This is the advice of his friends. Flee as fast as you can. Now they use a lot of imagery here to tell them how bad things are, but what they're saying is this: David, you're too weak. You're just a bird. Run away. Run. You can't handle it. There are things out there that are ready to get you. They're going to get you. They're going to destroy you. You can't handle this one, and they're about to let loose. They're going to sneak up on you. They're going to find your weakness. They're going to kill you. All hope is lost. You know, certainly David's in a bind. I mean, I think you can see the pattern here. You know, you're too weak. No one's out there for you. You're going to be destroyed. Everything's going to be destroyed. Even as I read that, I just have to think, man, it sounds like just about the news every single day nowadays. We can't do this. Everything's out there to get us. You're going to be destroyed. Everything's going to be destroyed. But here, this is advice from David's friends who are unknowingly working for the world. Working for the world, to throw off David's perception. So, you have things in your life like that. You have advice in your life like that. What great trial, what great difficulty is out there that looms so large in your life that wise counsel says this: flee from it. Don't trust God. Just run. Your God isn't big enough for this one. I've had that myself. I've had times where people have encouraged me that, hey, the sensible path is this way. Not that way where God's telling you, it's this way. Times where it seemed crazy to talk about trust. I know you've had those times too. Those times where it seems like, hey, there's no way this can work out. There's no way you can make it. There's no way God can come through. We can really sympathize with David here, can't we? We know those times where we've just had to say, oh, God, really? Are you taking us through this? We know what it's like. Well, that's the trial. That's what we see here for David. Now, if David was not coming from a position of trust, what would have happened? His perception would have been off. He would have failed. He would have turned around and the story would be different. You know what? We have that same issue. If our perspective is off, if it is wrong, if we see trials in our lives and we agree with poor advice, meaning anything that does not encourage us to trust God, we might step out of trusting God, and it will be very costly for us if we do that. So beware any advice that would not have you trusting God. How do you respond then to bad advice? Well, David knew how to respond well. And we see that because how do we respond? We need to keep our eyes on God. See, we've seen David's heart from the outset here. He trusts in God. Lord, in you I take refuge. We've heard the advice of David's friends. No, don't take refuge there. Flee. Run away. But now David presents reality as it is. He sort of pulls back that veil that the world tries to throw up to get us to see things not as they are. And he presents the proper perception of the challenges that are facing him. He does this as we pick it up again in verse 4, where we read this. Now it's David's turn to talk. His friends have been talking. Now it's his turn. And he says this: the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold. His eyelids test the sons of men. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked. And the one who loves violence his soul hates. Is all hope lost? Are the foundations crumbling? No. That's David's response. No. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. See, by invoking the temple and throne, David is showing what he perceives, that God is at the center of the universe and God is the one in control. See, David's not talking about the earthly temple. It wasn't built yet. His son's going to build it many years after the time that David is writing this. But he is acknowledging that God is at the center of everything, that God is exercising all authority, that he is the one in control, no matter how big the challenges are. No matter how much it seems that things are just coming apart, no matter how crazy it seems that things have gotten, God is in control. God is all-powerful. He is almighty. Now just stop and think about that a moment. What you're facing, whatever challenge it may be in your life, whatever it is that you think about before you can go to sleep because it's on your mind, God is still in control. He is still the one in control. And you can trust him. But not only that, David reminds us that God is omniscient. He's all-seeing. Nothing hides from his eyes. They behold. See, David's friends, they were warning him that there was danger that was sneaking up that couldn't be seen. But you know what? God saw it. God knows what's coming. Nothing surprises God. It's all as clear as day to him. Same is true for us in our issues. God sees it. These things aren't missed by God. They don't take God by surprise. No matter what trials we may have in our lives, God's in control. No matter what comes against us, God sees it all. He's the one judging. He's the one judging, no one else. This imagery is sort of fun here as it talks about God peering. The image here is the idea of eyes that are squinting, because that's how we check things. If you're looking really closely at something, you're going to squint your eyes and look very closely, test it, see what's going on. That's what God is doing in this image. Now, of course, not with eyelids like ours, but he's peering into circumstances to see what is happening, because he knows, despite all the fears that could be thrown up, God sees the truth, and he's able to judge between the right and the wrong, no matter what it looks like at the particular moment. Here, David also is acknowledging that God is doing the testing. He's testing the righteous and the wicked. Now, he uses the term here that we should be familiar with. It's the term that's used for forging. It's refining. God is refining them in fire. The ones who reject him, who continue to run after this bad perception, who live out a life of not trusting, well, ultimately they're going to be tossed out. They haven't put their trust in God. These are the ones that, as it says, his soul hates. That's strong words. But it's what's going on here. The righteous, though, he continues to purify. That's where we can rest. That is where we can rest, knowing that God is in control. So how do we respond? How do we keep our vision right? Know that God is in control. Keep your perception on him. See, he never moves from his position of authority. He never changes how he is and how he interacts. He's always in control. And throughout it, he continues this refining process of those he loves. This is what he does. We went over that at length going through 1 Peter. That God refines those he loves. And like we read in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 7, so that the proof of your faith be more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. That's what he's doing. Taking us through the fire, refining us. Even as Paul will say, like building up all those items on the foundation that we have in Christ. What gets built up? If it's of faith, if it's of useful, when the fire comes, it remains. If it's stubble and hay, it gets burned up, it goes away. One with the foundation will still make it, but like Paul says, like one may get it through the fire. They have nothing to show with it. Maybe the clothes on their back, if those don't get burned up, but nothing left to show for what God gave them. And so, we're called to trust. We're called to have faith. We are called to know that God is the one in control through everything that we're taken through. So now David ends this psalm with a reminder of what the Lord will do, how the story really ends, and how we need to end. Because how do we end? We end in trust. Picking up in verse 6, upon the wicked he will rain snares or coals. Fire and brimstone and burning wind will be the portion of their cup, for the Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness. The upright will behold his face. For David, it didn't matter how things were going to appear, because he knew that God is in control and his will be done. Even if the wicked appear to be doing well. If we look around us, sometimes we have to wonder, God, why is it that it seems like the wicked are the ones doing right? They're doing well. What's going on? Well, their end is written. David reminds us of this, that the end of the story has already been written. The wicked, they'll meet their end. The righteous, those who God has purified they will see God. So what does that look like in our lives? What does that look like for us? When it comes time for us to come face to face with the difficulties we face in our life, when we're hounded by enemies on every side, when it seems like we can't get rest because everything is against us, when our anxiety rises because there are real issues in the world and it's concerning, and we're given advice, disastrous advice to abandon God, what do? Should we listen to that advice? No. No, instead we should rest in the correct perception of where God is. And we need to trust Him, knowing the end of the story, because we have it. You know, it's good to know that God is refining us, bringing us through these things. Because He talks about righteousness a lot. And I know I don't always feel super righteous. You might. You might feel always righteous and upright at all times, but I know for me that there are times where I just don't feel righteous. And I'm reminded that, you know what? It's God's work doing this. God is the one in control. He is the one who is working these fires for something good, to refine us, to make us holy, getting rid of all that dross. It's something we can trust Him for. And the work's going to go on until He returns. But it's a good work. It's a good work that draws us near to Him. And in faith, as we trust Jesus, as we trust Him and walk with Him, we get to partake in His righteousness. We get to stand upright because of Him, even as we're being refined. See, that's the story. That's the story that God is writing for us. So what do we do? What do we do with all this? Well, we've discussed several ways we can look at this psalm and ways we can apply it to our lives, but I want to leave you with these. I think they're important, so I want to reiterate them so we know how we walk. See, we start with this like we learned. We start every challenge from a position of trusting the Lord. Now, you're not going to do that on your own. You're not going to do that just by mentally making it happen. You need to take steps of faith for that to be true in your life. Be in prayer. Open the Word. Study the Word. Draw near to God. And when you have that opportunity to trust, take that step. And then, 2, listen to advice. Certainly. But trust the Lord. See, advice isn't bad. In fact, we're called on to listen to advice. Now, I don't doubt that David, when he was listening to advice, that these people were trying to mislead him, but it just happened that they weren't seeing things rightly. Sometimes people see things rightly, and advice is good. You know, I have a wonderful example of this right now and right here. The truth is, I would rather be in person, of course. And in my own thinking, I'd probably run out and do this. But I will say, I had to listen to the advice of Chantel, who knew much better, to say, you know what, okay, it's right. You know, in this circumstance, I'm not afraid of a disease. I'm not afraid of catching COVID. I very much doubt that I have it. But actual wisdom says, you know, Mike, be smart about this one. Be okay, being humble, recording a sermon, and being willing to not be there. I hate missing y'all. But good advice that Chantel gave me is to do this. Listen to advice when it's good, but always walk with trust. Always walk with trust. If the advice says don't trust God, well, that's not advice to listen to. If the advice is God can't save you, that's not the advice to listen to. Now, salvation might look a little different than we want sometimes, but trust God. Which leads us to the third point here. Trust God. Trust God through the process, though. See, it's not just start from a place of trust, and not just when advice comes, make sure it's advice that leads you to trust God, but also in the process, as you're walking, trust God. You know, there's going to be trials. I mean, we know that right now. We're going through some things. But God is making use of them so that we can trust Him. He is continuing to refine us through all these things as we walk in trust. We can rest knowing that He is the one in control. And finally, number 4, keep your perspective straight. Keep your perspective straight. We've been given the right perspective. We need to hold to that. We can find that perspective written out pretty clearly in our memory verse that we're going over. Now, I know this week we're going over verse 10. But in the very first couple verses of it, we are given the right perspective. I want to read those for you. This is Colossians Chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Now, it's going to sound a little bit differently. I'm reading it out of the NASB here, but follow along with me, if you will. Colossians 3, verses 1 through 4. Hopefully you got that in memory, so you can follow along right now. But here, Paul's telling us, therefore, if you've been raised with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not on things that are on earth, for you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with Him in glory. That is our perspective. That is what we cling to. We keep our eyes on our God, where He is, and we trust that when He returns, we're going to be there with Jesus. He's our life. He's our source, and we can rest in that. So we need to trust God and have that right perception. Trust can be elusive. It can be difficult. So many things are out there telling you, look this way, look that way. But you know what? With the right perception, we can lay aside our fears and we can actually trust the Lord through everything He is walking us through. I know that's not easy. We're walking through things now. I hope that we're never hesitant to share our struggles and our heartaches. We have to walk through trust in this moment as we wait on results. We need to walk through trust as we're waiting on Jacob's surgery in just a little under 2 months now. We need to walk with the Lord in trust as we walk through difficult things. But you know what? Chantal and I, we've seen that. We've walked through those. And I will say that as we have trusted Him, every time God has rained the blessing down in some awesome ways. And I want to encourage you with that. Trust in God. Trust Him like the Psalm of Trust teaches us. And as you do, as you trust Him and walk, saying, God, I'm going to walk as You tell me to. I'm going to trust You first. Well, you get to experience that taste that we see that David had as he trusted the Lord. We get to experience that taste, that experience of walking with God that the disciples got to walk in, that we're going to begin to see next week as we jump into Mark. We get to walk in that, and we get to follow in that path, and it is a wonderful one. So trust in the Lord. I want to close us with a prayer right now. So please, though I may be remote, though I may be distant, please pray with me. Lord God, I thank You for Your goodness. I thank You that we can trust in You. Lord, may we walk in trust. There are things that weigh us down, Lord, but we know You are God. This week, may we lay aside our pretensions. May we not get caught up in what the world says, but may we trust You. Oh, Lord, I thank You. And I pray all of this in the name of Your Son, Jesus, whom we can trust. Amen. Well, thank you for joining me in this morning. I pray that your week would be blessed and you would walk in trust. Now we get to act out a little bit of that as we get to join together in worship. We'll be listening from the parsonage, so hopefully everybody will sing loudly. But let us lift up the name of our God. You have a great day there. Bye.